Yesterday, we got to take my son to a birthday party because he's 4, and that's what you do, apparently, when you're 4, is just go to birthday parties. We have another one today because that's just our life now. But we went to this place called Cheeky Monkey, which, if you don't know, it's like a bougie McDonald's play place. And it's just like all the tubes and all the slides, and he was running around. He was having a blast, and I'm just looking up at him, and I'm like, oh, look at him up there just getting all those germs. He's just... and it's going to be a hard week. So, but as we're doing that, we get to the point where it's time for like food and cake and all that. So me and the other dads were like, hey guys, let's all come out of here. And it was this cool moment for us where we realized like the control we had over our kids, because they looked at us and just were like, no. And then they ran up into the tubes. And that created this cool moment where we then had to like go through the tubes to go get them. And if ever there is a beautiful example of the fact that you just control so little in this world, it is the toddler phase, I have learned. And I bring that up because I think that as we are continuing in this series on prophets, there is something to be said about understanding what it means to have control versus not have control. Very specifically, there is something to be said about understanding that there is one who actually does have control in this world. And today, we're going to explore that notion with the prophet Daniel. And Daniel is probably the most famous of prophets, in large part because you know stories from his book. See, because a lot of the prophets, they have things where they like write just statements of what Israelites ought to have been doing in the Old Testament and how they needed to fix their ways. Last week we looked at Ezekiel, who did all this wild and crazy imagery in order to communicate the message of God. And Daniel's a little bit different because the entire first half of Daniel is a story. And the story, it ends up playing out in such a way that we learn the lessons of how it is we're called to live. Because the way the story goes is that Daniel and his friends end up in exile with the Babylonians, and they end up being forced into doing things. So the Babylonians try to force them into living a certain way, and they always resist. And in each of these stories, we end up getting a lesson of how we can live more faithfully for God. And these are the stories we end up sharing with all of our kids, right? Like, these are our favorite stories to share in Sunday school. We have things like Daniel and the Lion's Den, which is somehow a children's story. It's this story where Daniel wasn't listening to the king, and so the king said, I'm going to put you in this pen with a bunch of hungry lions, and that's what we tell our 5-year-olds. And the other one that's incredibly famous is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who end up getting thrown into a fiery furnace for not listening to the king. Again, yay for Vacation Bible School. And so that's the story I want to start with actually today, is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And it comes from Daniel 3. And in Daniel 3, it says this. It says, Nebuchadnezzar, that was the king, said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. The context of this story, as I said, was Daniel and his 3 friends are being forced to live in a very specific way by the Babylonian rulers. And the reason for this is that when the Israelites were forced into exile, they were forced into this new land with this new people. And in order to prevent any sort of uprising, the Babylonians decided, hey, what we'll do is we'll get everybody to assimilate into our culture so that after a generation or two, they'll just forget any of the things that they used to have. It would just be like a part of their history or a part of their legend, but nobody will live by it anymore. And the best way to pull that off is to get a few young, influential nobles and to make them the poster children of assimilation. And so this is how Daniel and his three friends end up getting effectively kidnapped and forced to live in the palace with the Babylonian rulers. Because their goal is to make these four assimilate into that Babylonian culture. So much so that their names are not even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their names are Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those were their Hebrew names, but those got taken from them in hopes that if they take on these other names, that it will make it easier for them to be this example of just giving up everything that they once held. And the next thing that happens is King Nebuchadnezzar ends up telling them, you need to bow down and worship this image that I have created. He has this image of himself created in gold. And he says that you ought to worship this image, effectively saying you ought to worship me as king if you are truly going to live in my land. And if anybody who doesn't do that is going to be thrown into this furnace. And he has these three people who are supposed to be these impressionable, influential individuals who are going to be leading the charge to make everybody else fall in line. And they look at him and they say, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to focus on the things that actually matter. And it's this incredible moment where when I look at that, I focus so much more on King Nebuchadnezzar and the desperation he has of wanting to control every little thing that he can possibly control, and how futile that actually is in this world. Because anytime we try to go out of our way to control things, we end up actually effectively making things worse for ourselves. I was thinking about this because earlier this week, I was watching this episode of the show Bluey. Now, if you don't have kids, you may not know about Bluey. If you do have kids, you absolutely know about Bluey. And if you know anybody who does, they will tell you that they love watching Bluey because their kids love it, and they're lying. They love it because they love watching Bluey, because it is the best adult show masquerading as a toddler show that has ever been made. Because there's usually, in general, there's not toddler shows that tackle really difficult issues like mental health and infertility and aging parents and all of these kind of things. But those are all three very real episodes in this Australian cartoon with these blue healers. And I brought an image of Bluey so that you get a good vibe of what's going on. Yeah, these guys. So this is Bandit, and that's his wife Chili. And in this, there's this episode where they end up deciding to sell their house. And the reason they end up deciding to sell their house is because Bandit believes that if he can take this new job in this new city, he can provide for his family this better life. And it ends up putting his two girls and his wife through this incredible turmoil, because he's going, listen, if I can just do this, everything is going to get better. And they go, we don't want to do this. And at one point, one of his girls, Bluey, literally says, like, I don't want a better life. I want this life. But you have this moment where he's so deeply inspired to want to take control of every possible thing. And what they're doing is they're telling the girls, and he's telling his wife, like, everything's going to work out. And the problem is his girls are, like, hearing this, and they're thinking, like, oh, if everything's going to work out, then that means that the good ending that we really want to happen is going to happen. And so then when the house ends up actually selling, they get completely defeated, because in their mind, they had created this image of what working out was actually going to be, because even they themselves were trying to control this situation by preventing their house from being sold. When the best wisdom that actually came from this was when people would look at them, and when they would say, this is a terrible thing that's happening to us, and they go, well, we'll see. Or when at the end of the episode, when they decide not to actually end up selling their house, they decide to not take the job, they end up staying where they're at, and the response is still, this was the best thing that's ever happened to us, and they still say, we'll see. This juxtaposition between trying to control what we can control versus embracing the reality of there is so much in this world that we cannot possibly know. But we'll see. Because when I look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I hear that line where they go, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not have to defend our faith to you. Our God can rescue us. But even if he doesn't, you need to understand that we're never going to actually worship the image you've created. Is this moment of them going, God can save us, but we'll see. You could make us bow down to us, and it could be good for you, but we'll see how things actually end up playing out. For us, when we go so far out of our way to try to control every situation, we lose sight of the fact that there are so many things outside of the things that we can possibly comprehend that it is foolish to feel as though we can put our hands around it. When instead what we need to try to be doing is getting to this point where we look at the most difficult moment that's in front of us, this moment where we're asked to walk into a proverbial fire. And we walk in at peace. Where we don't go in kicking and screaming, we don't go in fighting, but we walk in at peace because we believe that there is a being who actually does have control of the situation. And so no matter what ends up happening, it'll all work out. Because here's what ends up going on immediately after where we last finished in Daniel 3, where it says Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace and heated it 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. And King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked the advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." And he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps and perfect governors and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. And it's the happy ending. Everything ends up working out great for them. And it's this moment where, like, when I read that passage, I feel kind of 2 things. I feel like joy because I go, look at how God took them out from this moment. But also I do love the moment where they go, listen, like, even if God doesn't save us, he's still the king on high. Because the assurance to walk into the most difficult moments in front of us is the thing that God has actually asked us to have. When we think about how many of us have lost sleep at night, how many of us have been unable to eat, how many of us have completely worked ourselves into this anxious puddle through all the worry and fear and the doubt of the things we cannot control, when what we really need is the ability to say, I'm never going to give myself up to this world. I'm going to simply give myself unto God, knowing that that will be enough. And no matter what happens, it's going to be okay. But the reason I do end up loving that passage is because not only does it show that everything is going to be okay and that happy endings can in fact come from the worst possible situations, it ends up giving this foreshadowing of another passage within Daniel where it talks about how it looked as though there was one who was the son of the gods walking around amongst them. See, because I talked about how earlier the first 6 chapters of Daniel are very story-driven. And there's a lesson in each one of the stories. When you get to Daniel 7 through 12, it takes a hard left turn, and it becomes much more like Ezekiel with all the weird, crazy imagery. And so I always love telling people, I'm like, listen, I love Daniel. It's one of my favorite books. You should read the first 6 chapters and then stop, and then we can have coffee, and then you can read 7 through 12. But in 7, it gives this very clear example of who God actually is. Because when Daniel himself has this image in Daniel 7, it says, "As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair on his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." It's this passage of Daniel that opens up with him seeing these 4 beasts coming out from the sea until they're vanquished by the Son of Man, the very same title that Jesus himself uses to refer to himself all throughout the Gospels. Now, last week when we were studying Ezekiel, I brought along a bunch of imagery because I thought it was helpful to be able to see it, and you should just know that when I saw this, I wanted to do it again. So Jordan, I think, is going to throw up a really great image of this moment where you have Daniel, and in between Daniel are these 4 beasts and the Son of Man, and yet he doesn't look afraid because he knows the authority of the one on the Most High. He knows that if he keeps his eyes focused on the Son of Man, focused on the Son of God, focused on the one who would become Jesus, that nothing else in this world, be it some beast coming out of the sea, be it some blazing furnace, being it something that we still struggle with today, can possibly stand a chance. And all we have to do is let go of control and let go of this belief that we ourselves can handle it on our own. And so the question then is, what do we do then if we're supposed to let go of control of everything else? What do we actually respond with? And the idea that I'm struck with is that you focus on the things you actually can control. You focus on the things that are actually going to make an impact. Now, I was thinking about this because a couple of weeks ago, I ended up going on this really cool trip to Savannah, Georgia, because I got to go see the Savannah Bananas in person, and it was one of the coolest trips I could ever experience. If you've never heard of the Savannah Bananas, they're kind of like the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, but they're like significantly better. And the reason that they exist is because their owner, Jesse Cole, he grew up playing baseball. He got into coaching in baseball, and he found himself completely and utterly bored with the product that was baseball, and he realized that if he was bored, that everybody else was bored when they watched this game as well, and he realized that they had an opportunity to create something special that was completely and totally geared towards fans having the best possible experience. And so everything about the organization that he made embraced that very idea. To the extent where, like, they, when you go there, all the food is all you can eat, free buffet food of all the baseball concessions that you could possibly want, so that they don't nickel and dime you, because they go nickel and diming fans for food once they already paid money to get into the stadium just doesn't feel right. When after the game, rather than the players going to their locker rooms, the players actually come out and they have a big party in the plaza so that every fan has an opportunity to get autographs and to meet and take pictures with every single player that they want to take a picture with, because that's the great experience. To the extent where they don't even have actual cheerleaders. They have a group of dads who, with some wicked dad bods, with pom-poms called the Man Nanas, who are they're cheerleaders for them, because that feels, honestly, way more fun and way more fans first. And the reality is that by embracing this thing, controlling the things that they can control, which is to create this incredible product, they've gone on to incredible things. They now have more followers on social media than 28 of the 30 MLB teams. And just last month, they sold out Clemson Stadium, Death Valley, 81,000 fans to watch a baseball team that pretends to be silly but actually gives people what they deeply want and need. And there was this cool moment where Jesse Cole got to meet Dabo Swinney, the head football coach of the Clemson Tigers, and they had this really cool conversation. And I brought along a clip to show you kind of what his mentality is and what can happen when you embrace that. Take a look.
You guys are fascinating, man.
It's an obsession.
And it's hard to do something that's never been done.
Yeah. I'm not afraid of the things that go wrong. I want to be the fastest learning organization in Solve Sports. The only way you learn faster is by doing more and doing new things and trying new things and experimenting. So it's like, we're going to do this and we're going to learn so much.
I love it.
And get us to the next football game and then get us to the next one. I want to play at Central Park. I want to play on a beach. I want to play on an aircraft carrier. I don't know how we're going to do it. It's one fan at a time. I don't care if it's 81,000 fans or 8,000 fans.
That's exactly
That's
right.
the principle.
And if y'all keep that as your North Star,
Yeah.
you're going to continue to be successful.
Even with all the criticism and misunderstanding.
Well, that's going to come with it. Some people, we want to see you be successful, and they love to see that, but then
Once you get there.
how we tear them down.
Yes.
That's all part of it.
It's hard. The only way you don't get criticized, you don't do anything.
That's right. Yeah, and that's what we're still saying. If you live for the applause, you'll die from the rejection.
Yes.
So that can't be your
How do you have that
driving
middle, that
force.
balance, yeah.
You got to build it from the inside out,
Yeah.
not the outside in.
Yeah.
What's inside of us has to blossom on the outside.
Yeah, and it's what do you enjoy doing when no one else is watching?
exactly
It's
right.
you got to enjoy the practice when no one else is watching. We leave millions of dollars on the table because it's not fans first. So if you want to come criticize us, fine. But we're doing what we believe is best for fans.
You guys are fascinating, man.
It's an obsession.
And it's hard to do something.
I didn't just get to go. I became a big fan myself while I was there. But here's what I love. I don't know if they're ever going to play on an airline carrier. I don't know if they're going to ever do all those crazy things. But here's what I know. They know who they want to be, and they're pursuing that very thing. They're controlling the things that they can control. They can't control whether or not they're going to go play baseball in all these crazy scenarios, but they can control whether or not they give fans an amazing experience while they're there. And I love that moment where he says, listen, you are going to, if you keep this as your North Star, you're going to be successful. And truth is, if you do that, you're going to get some people who are going to hate on you. You're going to get some people who are going to want to tear you down. And that's okay. Because you're trying to do something that is irrelevant of whether or not they try to tear you down. And for us, the reality is as fun as it is to have a whole thing where you have male cheerleaders and all these other crazy funny things there in Savannah, all of that is eventually going to wither away. And the one thing that's going to be constant is the Son of God who sits up on the throne. And so what we have to do is figure out how we actually make that our North Star. There's a story of a guy here at St. Andrew. Me and him, many years ago, we were having breakfast, and he was telling me about how he had this opportunity in front of him, where if he could go and close this deal with this client, it would end up setting him up and his family up in a way that nobody could possibly comprehend as far as like wealth and influence, etc. But in order to close the deal, he had to take this client, the people from this client, to a club that his wife was not going to be exactly a fan of. All right, is everybody tracking? Cool. Okay, so his choice: do I go to this club that I know I don't need to go to, or do I change the trajectory of my career? And the question for him is really simple: is who do you actually want to be? And he goes, well, I really want to be a really good father. I really want to be a really good husband. Okay, great. What world by doing this thing that you've been asked very explicitly not to do, is that going to actually lead you to being in that place? And what is the decision you can actually make that's going to allow you to be that person? And what he realized, he was like, well, the things that I can actually control in this life, I can't control whether or not I even actually close that deal. There's a chance I do this with these clients and we don't even close the deal. But I can control whether or not I pray. I can control whether or not I go to church. I can control whether or not I bring my kids with me and I talk with my kids about Scripture. I can control my faith in God. And when he did exactly those things, did he close that deal with that client? No. Does he care? Not even a little bit. Because he found something that is far more beautiful. He found something that is far more greater. And this is the calling on our lives, is that as we look at the things in our lives that want to have control of us and that we want to control, we can give them up in such a way where we focus on the one thing that actually does have control, and it's the one who sits on the throne. And so my challenge for you this week is to figure out how exactly to do this. And what I need you to know is that I understand that these are some of those sermons where they sound good on a Sunday, but then on Monday you're actually like back in the midst of the difficulty of the world and the problems that you have around you again. And so here's the thing that I want to encourage you to do, is to surround yourself with people that can remind you of what it means to actually keep your eyes on a North Star and letting go of the things that you can't control and that are pulling you away from it. And the reality is I want to help be one of those people. And so I'm going to do a thing that I don't think any pastor here has ever done, and we're going to find out if this was a mistake or this was brilliant or maybe a little bit of A and a little bit of B. So I've got one final image that I'm going to have you put up. That is a QR code. If you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to my calendar for work. We have 3 months of summer coming up in front of us, and here's the deal. I want to have as many breakfasts, coffees, and lunches with each and every one of you this summer. Because I want you to know that no matter what you're going through in life, I will be somebody who stands with you in front of that furnace and says it can't harm us. I want to be somebody who sits with you and tells you about the joy of what it means to keep our focus and our eyes on Christ. I want to be somebody who gets to share in all the joy of what it means to have a faithful understanding of this world and to let go of all the other pieces. And so on there, scroll through it, find a time this summer, and I will come and I will have whatever with you, breakfast, lunch, coffee. If a time doesn't work there, email me and we'll figure out something. But let's make this summer be the start of an incredible new direction where we follow in the wisdom of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we say we'll never bow down to the powers of this world because we know it's all going to work out. Amen. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, thank you for coming to this world. Thank you for being the Son of Man who sits on the throne most high. And God, we ask that you allow us to keep you as our North Star. We ask you to allow us to look to you for the things that we cannot control and to find peace and find solitude as we walk into that fire, knowing that we worship a God who doesn't demand that we worship him, but instead sits with us in the fire itself. So much so that we worship out of love and adoration instead. It's in your name we pray.